What if the best weapon you had in a crisis wasn't a sword, but an idea, a really well-structured one? Today, we're going to go back more than 500 years to see how one rabbi built an intellectual ark to save his entire community from falling apart.
So just imagine for a second, your community, your culture, everything you believe in is being picked apart by these brilliant, sophisticated arguments. What do? Well, that's not a hypothetical. That was the exact crisis facing Rabbi Isaac Arama back in 15th century Spain.
And you can see from this timeline, Arama's entire life was basically defined by this crisis. His most important work began decades before the 1492 Spanish expulsion, which was a just devastating event in Jewish history. He wasn't just some witness watching the storm clouds gather. He was right there on the front lines, trying to build a defense.
All right, so let's get into it. This was a thinker forged in crisis. And to really get what he came up with, his brilliant solution, we first have to understand the world he was so desperately trying to hold together.
See, the Jewish community in Aragon, Spain at the time was amazing. Super educated, intellectually curious, really vibrant. But there was a new kind of threat taking hold, and it was a sneaky one.
Yeah, this wasn't a physical battle with swords and shields. This was a war for hearts and minds.
And here is the absolute core of the problem. You had these Christian sermons that were using Greek philosophy, really sophisticated intellectual stuff to interpret the Bible. And the best and the brightest of the Jewish community, they were drawn to it. So the threat wasn't coming from the outside, it was an internal collapse, a crisis of faith.
So Rabbi Arama saw this happening, and he decided he had to fight fire with fire. He set out to create what you might call an intellectual vaccine. And his response wasn't to just get angry or, forbid people from going to these sermons. Nope. He took a much, much smarter approach. He decided to develop a new kind of sermon, one so powerful and logical that it would prove Jewish thought wasn't just competitive, it was superior. His counterattack, his vaccine, came in the form of a book, Akedat Yitzhak. So let's crack it open and see how he actually built this intellectual weapon. Okay, so here's the genius of it. Almer designed this revolutionary three-part structure for every single sermon he gave, and each part had a very specific job to do in making his listeners' faith stronger. First up, he met the challenge head-on. He'd start by diving right into a big philosophical concept, like free will. He was basically showing his community, hey, we can grapple with these complex ideas on our own terms. We have a rational, Jewish way of looking at life's big questions.
But just laying out a philosophical argument was only the opening move. The real magic, his absolute masterstroke, was what he did next, how he connected those big ideas back to the very heart of Jewish tradition.
In the second part, he would weave his philosophical point together with core Jewish texts, like stories from the Midrash. But then he did something really radical for the time. He systematically brought in teachings from the Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, or Jewish mysticism. This stuff was usually kept for small, elite circles, and he was bringing it out into the public square for everyone.
And finally, for the grand finale, he brought it all home. After you've explored the philosophy and the deep mysticism, he'd turn right back to the biblical text itself. He'd use this awesome Q&A format to tackle tricky verses, showing his audience how these deep, complex ideas actually gave them concrete answers. He was making this ancient text totally come alive with new meaning. So there you have it, the whole system at a glance. You've got the thesis, the synthesis, and the application. It was a complete intellectual toolkit, delivered week after week, designed to make faith feel both totally rational and deeply, deeply meaningful.
So, did it work? What was the ultimate impact of this incredible intellectual project?
Well, Akedat Yitzhak is made up of 105 sections, or gates as they're called. That's 105 distinct blueprints for intellectual and spiritual survival. And this is where the story gets really powerful. The very tools he developed to protect the community before the expulsion, they became the intellectual lifeline they so desperately needed to survive the trauma after it. His book became a kind of ark of ideas, giving the exiles a way to hold on to their heritage in a completely shattered world.
When you look at it, Arama's story really proves that a powerful, well-structured idea isn't just an argument, it can be a lifeboat. He literally built an ark of ideas that carried a culture through its darkest storm. And that leaves all of us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? In our own turbulent times, what are the essential ideas we need to preserve? What's going to be in our ark?